Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Cruz Loma wash processed Ecuador from Moonwake Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Moonwake, based out of San Jose, California, and this is their first ever appearance on this channel, as they're a coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. You guys might have a fair bit of familiarity with them if you're subscribed to Brian Kwan's YouTube channel, as their Tesla Cybertruck coffee bar has appeared on his channel quite a bit over the last few months. I did purchase this coffee long before its first appearance, as Moonwake's a coffee roaster I've been wanting to review for quite a while now. So when I saw this coffee on their website, it felt like a great opportunity to finally review them, as I haven't seen a lot of Cruz Loma Mejorados out there. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one turned out. This right here is day 36. And while doing research for this video, I actually found out that Moonwake does have a brew guide on their website, which I did not know about before starting this review. But it is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, 205 degrees Fahrenheit. So pretty similar to ours. Ours is at a 16:1, but I actually found the best success with this coffee, pushing it a little bit more at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee. So given that I don't have a lot of familiarity with this coffee roaster, I think I was a little surprised to find out that this coffee was a fair bit lighter than I might have expected going into it. And this isn't even necessarily the latest that they go, as I understand that they do offer an ultra light roast of some of their coffees. This one they just have labeled as a light, and it is still a pretty light coffee by most people's standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we opted for the V60, and the coffee was mostly offering a citric forward cup, encompassed by what I would describe as a honeyed base with a pretty well-defined sense to it. The cup has a bit of the listed pair in terms of the brightness to it, with a very lingering finish as well. Slight spiced quality in line with the ginger snap, though if I'm being completely honest, I oftentimes wonder if maybe that was the priming effect throughout this coffee, as it's not something I experienced from a lot of Mejorado coffees, but this one, as well as another Cruz Loma coffee that we're going to be discussing at some point, is also offering a little bit of that kind of spiced quality to it. Fair bit of sweetness, otherwise pretty straightforward cup. We move on to day 16 as we opted for the Chemex, and it's pretty similar, though it does continue to offer both the honeyed base as well as the complementary citric attributes to it. There was an ever so slight nutty quality on this day as well, with plenty of the listed pear brightness present yet again, and a little bit more of the herbality. So we are just going to continue on to the day 18 mark, as we were kind of speedrunning a couple of these earlier days through the April brewer, and it was the best it had been up to this point, as it was offering the most amount of sweetness. The listed pair is actually relatively well defined, as typically I don't necessarily feel that with a lot of coffees when it's a note that's listed on there. Citrus is also a bit more pronounced in a sweeter sense, as there's still the slight spiced quality to it. Continue on to day 21 as we opted for the V60 with higher temperatures and a more fine grind, and interestingly it was definitely the best it had been up to this point, as it was offering almost a sweeter brown butter feel to it, and it was somewhat reminiscent of what I would describe as the brown sugar milk tea. So that kind of came a little bit out of nowhere, as it had been a very sweet coffee up to this point, but this really seemed to accentuate a lot of those sweeter qualities as well. Brightness is relatively moderate but well defined in that pear sense once again. Listed citrus is also present in the sweeter sense, but for the most part it's pretty clean and sweet all around, so no complaints at this moment. It's trending in the right direction. Continue on to day 24 as we opted for the Chemex, and with the same adjustments as the V60, it continues to trend in the nice direction with a sugary fruit sweetness that continues to remain present with a lasting brightness to it. A slight bit more in the citric sense, and that's the fruit profiles that we're getting a little bit more of. Cup in general felt a little bit softer, and I think I can attribute that to the brew method, as we'd go right back on day 27 with the V60 and the higher extraction recipe. And even though it was not quite as good as that day 21 mark, it was still better than the previous day, better than that Chemex day, as this was the first time I felt a little bit of inconsistency, though I think one of the big keys on this coffee was waiting a little bit more of the cool down, though it offered a slightly more generic generic sweetness, as the previously mentioned apple pear brightness is still present, still very well structured, still very good, but just the overall well-defined sweeter attributes of this one felt a little bit more generic on this day. Continue on to day 30, back through the V60, and there was a little bit more inconsistency once again, as it has a lot of the Mejorano brown candy sweetness in the most prominent and defined sense on this day, which is definitely going to be a good thing for me, because getting a little bit more of that was something that I was striving for and looking for in this coffee right from the start. Still the complementary citric brightness, but tons of sweetness now as I continue to see the coffee increase in sweetness, something that's notable here on day 33 as we went back to the V60 with the same adjustments, and it's the best it's been by far at this point, as it's offering the best defined sugary candy sweetness to it. Possible priming effect does still seem to be present, as I felt a little bit of illicit spice, which is something I felt in the earlier days, but the more and more we were working through this coffee, the less I was feeling of it, as this one just continued to offer some very nice clarity and cleanliness all around. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that one real quick, and it's the sweetness level 5. So once again, we have a washed Mejorano coffee that continues to score a level 5 in terms of the sweetness, because these coffees are about as sweet as it gets when it comes to wash processed coffees, and this one is also no exception to that. As I found on the earlier days, I wasn't necessarily expecting it to maybe reach that level 5, but the more and more I continued to work through this coffee, I said, man, it just has that classic Mejorano sweetness to it that continued to be present and defining for this coffee throughout. So for that reason, it did just about the level 5. True level 5, especially for a wash processed coffee. Continue on to the level 4, starting with the cleanliness level 4. Great definition, great structure, great clarity. So I really had a lot of positive things to say about this coffee in that sense, as oftentimes I can feel with these Mejorano coffees a little too generic, maybe a little bit too skewed in one direction, but this one right here, you're really feeling a lot of the attributes that are present within it. So the clarity, the cleanliness, very good on this coffee. So, finish, level 4. So even though it does have that very long-lasting kind of brown candied sweetness to it, I do have to say that it is finishing in that even sense. So I think it's rare that any of the, we'll say, wash processed Mejorano coffees are going to score anywhere above that level 4. This one just truly in line with what you would expect from that. Continue on to the citrus level 4. And I can't quite recall what the citric note that they do have listed on here is, and I wouldn't necessarily say that the citric quality of this one is overly well defined, though it is still a sweeter citric quality to it. And it's one of those things that you are feeling in the cup right from the onset, and it does kind of mirror and complement the other attributes of it. I think maybe I was a little less focused on that, mostly because it was offering so much of the sweeter qualities that I was looking for, that I was like, ooh, let me pinpoint these sweeter qualities, though maybe a little bit more attention could have been paid to the citric qualities. As next up, we have the caramel level 4, and that is that Mejorano brown candy sweetness, and I have heard some people describe it as maybe being a little bit on the honeyed side of things, and if it is, then it's on a much more, we'll say, artificial sweeter honey sense. But for me, I would have to say that it's just a little bit more of a kind of candied brown candy, so again, kind of a little bit more of a caramelized toffee-like component to it. So that right there at the level 4, definitely for me. Continue on to the level 3s, and we'll start with the acidity level 3. So this one was somewhere between a 3 and a 4, and I think when I was trying this coffee on the day we were making the tasting, when I was saying, I think pushing it to that level 4 might be a slight bit of a stretch. The acidity, the brightness is very well defined in this coffee. It just maybe not necessarily the most abundant, at least the way we were brewing it. So level 3 seems a good fit for that. Florality, level 3, I've been alluding to the honeyed component to this one and in a little bit more of a floral honey sense. So that could be there, though I honestly think that it's skewed a little bit more on the sweeter honey side of things. So level 3 was a good fit for me on that. Spice, level 3. Again, they have a ginger snap listed on here. I completely feel the priming effect was possibly at play in this one, because I wouldn't necessarily say that it was ever overly pronounced, which is why it's one of the more toned down attributes of this coffee at that level 3 mark. But I could say, yeah, I was probably getting a little bit of that from time to time. And then final thing really worth discussing in this tasting wheel is body at that level 2, as I think maybe some of the drawbacks of this specific varietal is that it doesn't always offer the most amount of body for a lot of people. So having it be on the slightly lighter side of the body in general, scoring at the level 2, could be a little bit of a sticking point to people. But as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I feel like I went away from this one starting to think that maybe we're reaching the washed Ethiopian territory with these Meherado coffees, because I can't recall any of them, at least in terms of the washed sense, that I haven't enjoyed, and this one is no exception. So I kind of went away from this coffee thinking, I don't really know any better or any different about this coffee roaster, given that I've enjoyed these Meherado coffees from pretty much every single coffee roaster that has released one. And that is no exception with Moonwake, as I really enjoyed this coffee, and that's not really surprising. Interestingly, I heard some people maybe kind of downplay this coffee, and they're like, yeah, it's just maybe a little bit one note, but I'm like, there's just a little bit more to this coffee than I might have imagined, especially going into it. So I do want to give them credit, because I still think that I was able to get maybe a little bit more depth and variety from this one and some of the other Meherado coffees that we've reviewed in the past. So credit to them, even though I don't necessarily feel like I've taken away too much from them as a coffee roaster based off of this review, mostly because it's just good. Then it's something that we'll have to revisit with them in the future, as their website's interesting. They do have some interesting coffees from time to time, and I imagine that we are going to go back and try some other ones at the very least, so we can get them on a tier list in the future, but also because this is a good starting point for them. I enjoyed this coffee enough to the point and extent that I would want to revisit them and try something else that they do offer. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, this one's pretty straightforward. If you enjoy your lighter profile Meherado coffees as I do, then this one's a really good fit. I didn't have any grievances, complaints, issues with this one at all. It offered everything I was looking for. A little bit of that fruit quality, great clarity, great definition, great cleanliness, but most specifically the very strong sweetness that I've come to expect from this varietal specifically. It's offering all of those in abundance, all with that slightly lighter profile. So keep all of those things in mind, and that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you enjoyed the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Cruz Loma wash processed Ecuador from Moonwake Coffee Roasters. Thanks for watching.